Hi, winners. I bet you've been waiting for this chapter. Chapter 42, when Kip and Molly decide to return. Here we go, without any more waiting. Kip and his sister decided to wait until daybreak before returning to Windsor Manor. They had only ever seen the gardener appear at night, and they hoped that the light would protect them. After a few fitful hours by the fire, they awoke with the first rays of dawn and set out on the wagon. They rode into the valley without speaking. Silence to match the silence. Kip clutched the reins, going over the plan they had discussed the night prior. He would collect their things from the stables, and if he could be found, give Dr. Crouch a proper burial. Molly, meanwhile, would go into the house and make one final attempt at convincing Master Windsor to leave with his family. It wasn't much of a plan, but at least they could say they tried. The job seemed simple enough, but when they rounded the final bend and Kip saw the house, he felt his entire body tense. "Are you sure it's smart to go back there?" he said. "I'm sure it's not." Molly reached down and squeezed his hand. "But there's what's smart and what's right. And Ma and Da would want us to do what's right." "Hold your breath," Kip said, and they rolled over the bridge. He eyed the river beneath them. He remembered his first time crossing this rotting bridge, the unnameable dread he had felt upon seeing the manor and grounds. It seemed like years ago when, in fact, it had been only a little over a month. When they reached the other side, he stopped the cart. "What are you doing?" Molly said, as he climbed down from the bench. "There's something I want to look at first." An idea was coming to him. Maybe there was a chance to do more than just warn the family. He slid courage, remember that's his crutch, courage, personification. He slid courage out from beneath his seat and fit it under his arm. "I won't be long." "You'd better not be," she said, taking the reins. He saw her nervously glance toward the river. "You be careful near that water." Kip smiled. "You be careful near that tree." He eyed the sun over the sour woods. "Morning's half over. If we want the family out by sundown, you best get moving." Molly nodded, snapped the reins, and continued towards the house. Kip watched her shrink into the distance, a tangle of wild hair atop a slender frame. She looked so different now, less like his big sister and more like a grown person. Not a stranger exactly, but like someone he knew only in passing, someone with thoughts and joys and pains that were hidden to him. His gaze shifted to the tree. It rose up like a tower in the harsh morning light, offering welcome shade on a hot day, and scattered around it a bed of comfortable leaves to lie upon. He shook his head, thinking about what was waiting beneath those leaves. "Watch your step, Malls," he said under his breath. Kip turned around, resting his weight on his crutch. When Da gave it to him, the cross piece had been taller than Kip's head. Now it was an effort to keep the crutch from slipping out from under his arm. Still, it was his courage, and he felt better simply for having it with him. He looked at the bridge that separated the island from the main road. Maybe this bridge was the key to stopping the tree. Kip had seen what the gardener was capable of and had no intention of fighting him. But if he could somehow make the bridge collapse, then at least other people wouldn't be able to cross over. Maybe the tree would die on its own from a lack of fresh victims. It was at least worth a try. Kip moved onto the bridge, keeping one hand on the thick rope, looking for weak spots in the wood. It was an ancient structure, and he felt continual surprise that it hadn't fallen into the river ages ago. He hoped this meant that it wouldn't take much to chop it down. The boards were slick with dew and mildew, and he nearly slipped a few times as he hopped from plank to plank. He stopped a few feet from the main road where he thought the bridge might be weakest. He set down his crutch and gingerly got to his knees. The sound of rushing water filled his ears, and he leaned over the edge, peering at the beams beneath. Thick black tendrils consumed the undercarriage. The roots extended all the way from the island and ended just before the road. "So that's why this bridge ain't fallen down yet," he muttered, almost impressed. "The tree don't want it to." Kip stared at the roots, something else sticking in his mind. He remembered their flight in the wagon. The night gardener had chased them to the end of the bridge and then stopped at this very spot as if pulled back by some outside force. He remembered that night he was spared in the garden when the same thing happened. "Of course," he said, sitting up. "He can only go as far as the roots." "Who can?" said a voice in his ear. Kip turned around to see Alistair standing a little bit behind him. The sound of the river must have covered his approach. His face was as pale as ever, but there was a red puffiness around his eyes that made it look as if he'd been crying. He was holding Kip's crutch in his two hands like a broadsword. Kip slowly pulled himself to his feet. "Good morning," he said, trying to keep his voice casual. "Here's two people you can definitely look at character change." "I'd hardly call it morning. It's nearly lunch." Alistair waved the crutch like a magic wand. "Where were you?" It took everything in Kip not to grab for the crutch. If Alistair knew he was bothered, then things would only get worse. He clenched his fist tight, trying not to let his irritation show. "Oh, we went for a drive." "A drive?" Alistair's expression soured. "My mother's sick, and you go off on a drive?" He wagged the crutch like an accusing finger. "I can tell you're lying. You've done something rotten. The doctor's missing. Father's having a right row right now. I'm going to tell him it's you two that frightened him off." "He was frightened all right, but it wasn't us that done it." Kip looked behind Alistair. In the middle of the lawn, he could see the shape of the fallen stable door, but no sign of the doctor beneath it. "You do know something. I'll have you sacked." Kip could not hide the smile that crept up on his mouth. "Won't do much good, 'cause we quit." Alistair stepped back like he'd been struck. "You what?" "Maul's in there right now telling your father we're running away. And if you was half as smart as you pretend to be, you'd do the same." Alistair put the crutch over his shoulder, gripping it like a mallet. "And why's that?" Kip bit his lip. "I know you think that tree's a good thing, but it ain't." Alistair's face tensed. "You don't know anything about that tree." Kip hopped closer. "I know it put your father in debt with those men from town. I know it made your ma sick." He could not resist himself. "I know it made you fat." Alistair narrowed his eyes. He raised the crutch above Kip's head, and for a moment Kip thought he was going to strike him. But then Alistair swung his arm out to the side, letting the crutch dangle over the edge, off the bridge. "Say that again." Kip hopped closer, feeling a clutch of panic. "Please don't. I am sorry. I didn't." Alistair opened his hands, and the crutch fell from his grasp. "Oops." Kip heard a splash in the river below. His heart plunged with it. He stumbled past Alistair, who was laughing, and peered over the edge. Courage was gone. Alistair moved behind him. "Good luck running away now," he said the words with a mocking brogue. Kip teetered to one side, his stomach reeling. That crutch was the only thing he still had from his dog, and now it was gone. He closed his eyes, forcing back tears. He could not let Alistair see him cry. He breathed slowly through clenched teeth. That was a horrible thing you've done. Alistair crossed his arms. Are you going to hit me? Tell me you hate me? Kip gripped the edge of the bridge, his body trembling with rage and shame. I don't hate you. He pulled himself upright and hopped towards Alistair on his one good leg. I feel sorry for you. Alistair responded as though he'd been struck. Why do people keep saying that? Kip hopped closer still. 'Cause it's true. The pain was excruciating, but he kept his gaze steady. He wasn't looking just at Alistair, but at every boy who had ever taunted and chased him, and he was determined not to let them win. Your ma's inside that house, halfway to dead, and that's a painful thing. But worse, she'll go to her grave thinking she's mother to a selfish, mean-headed bully who never did anything kind for no one. And she'll be right. What little color remained had drained from Alistair's face. His jaw was set and trembling. Kip thought Alistair might shove him or swear or even throw him off the bridge, but he didn't care. He turned around and, wincing with every step, headed out to the lawn. Alistair did not come after him. When Kip reached the stables, he glanced back towards the bridge. Alistair was still there, watching him. Before Molly talked to Master Windsor, there was one thing she wanted to do. She crept downstairs to her old bedroom and closed the door behind her. It had been less than a week since she had been inside this room, and yet it appeared to her a foreign place. She looked at the ugly black roots pushing through the ceiling and walls and shuddered, thinking of how she had once slept soundly in that bed. Not too soundly, she reminded herself. She walked to the wardrobe and opened the doors. Below empty pegs sat the old sea chest she had brought from her home. She raised the lid with her foot, as one might lift a rock with a snake underneath. The trunk was now empty, save the small bundle of letters from her parents. Just seeing them made her heart beat faster. She did not have an exact plan as to what to do with the letters, but she knew she couldn't leave them at the house. The idea of some other person coming upon them and reading them was too much to bear. She knelt and picked up the letters, and even now, even knowing that they were not real, she felt a longing to read them one last time. She held the envelopes to her nose, savoring the saltwater air. Her parents may have been gone, but a part of them still lived inside the letters, their voices woven into each word. She stuffed the envelopes into her pocket and went upstairs to find Master Windsor. Bertrand was, as she expected, sitting vigil at his wife's bedside. Since the collapse, he had spent hours this way, clutching Constance's hand quietly, reciting stories of their early marriage, courtship follies, and wedding day jitters, and the thrill of early parenthood. Molly noticed that when he told these stories, when he was dwelling on a happier past, he did not seem to stutter as much. Master Windsor, Molly said softly. If she startled him, he didn't show it. The prodigal maid returns, he spoke without looking up. What's that in reference to? I feared you'd run off with the doctor. His voice had the drained quality of someone too exhausted to fight. Molly shifted her weight. She wished she had more time to think about what to say. The fact is, sir, my brother and me can't work here no more. I think you know why. I've come for our things, and then we're moving on. His face twitched. You're leaving us? This house is a bad place, sir. Having grown up here, you know better than anyone. And she gave him a meaningful look. You can't quit, he stood, pushing his chair back from the bed. My family needs you. It's already done, sir. And it's for your family that I'm up here talking to you now. She took a step closer, fixing her eyes on his. You should come with us, all of us, tonight. Impossible. He paced in front of her. Connie is ill. My associates are coming tomorrow, and I still cannot pay them. So leave before they get here." "You're not listening," he snapped. "I need to stay here with the tree. If I can just get enough from it." He held up the key to the green door, clutching it in his hand. Molly could see that Master Windsor was deaf to mere arguments. He needed proof. She rushed forward and snatched the key from his grasp. "Give that back." Molly was already halfway down the hallway. "You'll get it back, sir, but before you do, there's something you need to see." She marched downstairs with a protesting Master Windsor in tow. Kip was waiting for them outside, rake in hand, standing next to a pile of leaves. He was balanced on his right leg, and Molly wondered why he wasn't using his crutch. "Did you find him?" she said. "Aye." Kip hopped back, revealing the cleared grave. "But it ain't pretty." Molly led Master Windsor to the edge of the hole, which was no longer empty. Dr. Crouch's corpse lay crammed into the narrow trench. His face was bloodless, his eyes wide open in a look of abject terror. A mesh of thin roots covered his entire body, swallowing him. Good heavens! Bertrand looked like he might be sick. Molly knew better than to prod him or speak in any way. She waited. After a long moment, he turned to her. Did he suffer?" It was fast. He didn't even have time to call out. "You should thank him," Kip said. "That grave was meant for you." Molly shot her brother a look. This was no time for malice. She took a step closer to Master Windsor, meeting his eye. "The doctor was murdered, sir, in cold blood, and I think you know what it was that done it." Master Windsor did not answer, but she could see in his face that he did know. "This is bad," he said. "This is very, very bad." And he stepped back from the grave, wringing his pale hands. Dr. Crouch was an important man, a gentleman. He'll be missed. There could be an inquiry, an investigation, even prison. "There's more at stake than prison, sir." She nodded to Kip. "Show him the rest." Kip proceeded to rake the leaves from the remaining holes. Bertrand watched but said nothing. Finally, Kip reached the last of the graves, the smallest one. Bertrand stared at it, one hand over his mouth. "It's penny-sized," he whispered. "There's one for each of us, sir. The tree's waiting until we're too sick to move, too sick to fight back. And from the look of you and your family, that won't be long." And with that, I have to stop. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.